University y The Future If. Por favor, Jacob. Jacob.
Hola.
Fuerte aplauso para Jacob. Welcome.
Thank you. Hola. Buenos días. Me llamo es Jacobo Morgan, and that is all of the Spanish that I know. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to come speak with all of you. It's actually my first time in Lima, and so I had the opportunity to see a little bit of the city, try some of your delicious food, and I'm very excited that you invited me to come speak with all of you. Now, I know that almost all of you here are in human resources. And I actually think that there's never been a more exciting time to be in human resources than now. Now is the most exciting time to be an HR professional. But at the same time, now is also the time where we have needed HR to not think and act and be like traditional HR. Now we need all of you to think differently about what HR means and what HR actually does. Now I know it's a little bit hard to try to understand what that means, so pretend for a minute that you are not you, but instead you're an alien. Okay, just imagine for a minute that you're an alien, and you came from another planet, far, far away. And you've come to planet Earth to observe and just watch humans. And you come down with your little spaceship, and you park somewhere, and then you just spend a little bit of time observing the people of planet Earth. Now think about some of the things that you would notice. Think about some of the things that you would observe about us humans on planet Earth. One thing that you'll obviously notice is that there are around 7.5 billion people on planet Earth. The next thing that you'll notice is that the lifespan of humans on planet Earth is around 70 to 80 years, depending on where you look. And then you'll also notice that almost everybody on planet Earth does this thing called work. And from all of these people on planet Earth, and from all of those that do this thing called work, almost all of those people don't like their jobs. They feel like the organizations that they work for don't appreciate them, that the managers that they work for don't treat them well. Now consider for a minute that if you look up the word employee in the dictionary, you'll find that synonyms for the word employee include cog, servant, and slave. That's synonyms for the word employee. Now I know a lot of you in this room are managers, but if you look up the word manager in the dictionary, you'll find that synonyms for manager include slave driver, boss, and my favorite one, zookeeper. So if you look up the word manager in the dictionary, a synonym for manager is zookeeper. If you look up the word work in the dictionary, you'll find that synonyms for work include daily grind, drudgery, and struggle. Now, if you put these three things together, we are all cogs working for you zookeepers as we go about our daily drudgery. Wow. Work sucks. Right? And this is how we have built our organizations over the last 10, 50, 100, 150 years, on top of these outdated ways of thinking about work. We've built organizations with the assumption that employees are expendable, that managers need to tell everybody what to do, and that work needs to be this thing that we all hate. And this is why we have such high levels of disengagement, I believe, at organizations around the world. Now, there used to be a time, and some of you may remember this time, where you could smoke inside of your offices. There also used to be a time when you could just work 9 to 5, and everything that you did after 5 o'clock was personal time. And there also used to be a time when if you had a job that you wanted to fill inside of your company, you would put up the job posting online, you would take out an ad in the newspaper, you would put it on one of these career sites, and one by one, people would show up to your organization and they would try to convince you why they should work there. They would talk to you about the schools that they went to. They would talk to you about all their accomplishments, their experience, all the wonderful things that they can do for your company. And you would then decide who is the best fit for your organization. But now look at the world that we live in today. You don't smoke in the office anymore. Most people don't really work 9 to 5 because work-life balance has been replaced by this idea of work-life integration. And today, when you have a job that you want to fill, and you put up the job posting, and one by one, employees come to you, but now the conversation changed a little bit. Because now when they interview for your company, they're the ones asking you the questions. They want to know, what is the leadership style like? What is the corporate culture like? What are the values and the purpose of your organization? What is it like to work there? And so now you have to convince others why they should work for you. And this is a crazy way for us to think about it because we as organizations are so used to just having people come in, we ask them a bunch of questions, and then we have to pick who we want to work for us. And now it's complete opposite. Now it's the prospective employees who are picking who they want to work for. And so what are you doing to convince people why they should work for you? Now, traditionally, companies do this in one of two ways. The first thing that companies have done for many decades is they tell compelling stories about what it's like to work in their organization. Right? So if you were to ask any company that's here, right, if you turned to your neighbor, if you have conversations later, if you were to ask them what it's like to work there, everybody here is going to say the same thing. It's great. It's amazing. It's wonderful. We have great technologies. We have beautiful spaces. The managers are great. The leaders are great. It's fantastic. And most of you in this room would be lying. The reality is that we tell very good stories about what it's like to work at our companies, don't we? Because that's what we use to convince people to apply for jobs. And so we have these wonderful pictures we put up online, we have great stories that we share with everybody, and we paint this wonderful picture about what it's like to work at our company. And then employees actually start working there, and they realize that that story isn't always true. Now, I like to call this the online dating syndrome. Now, before I got married, I tried online dating. And one of the big frustrations, and if you've ever tried online dating, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But one of the big frustrations is sometimes the person whose profile you see online and the person who actually shows up to the first date, not the same person. Right? Online, we all want to make ourselves look amazing and fabulous and successful and beautiful. And then you go up to the date and you say, what the hell is this guy? This isn't what you look like online. This is a totally different person. And I think the same thing is happening in our companies. Right? We tell that wonderful story about what it's like to work there. Employees show up and then they say, what the hell happened? This isn't what I was promised. This isn't what I was told. Imagine for a minute if every company in the world was honest about what it was like to work there. Right? And so imagine for a minute somebody applies to work at your company, and during the interview process, they ask you, what is it like to work here? And for a minute, you just forgot about all the stuff that HR needs to say, all the stuff that marketing needs to say, and you just told them the brutal truth. What would you say? You would probably say something like, well, I know that you're supposed to work like 30 to 40 hours a week. You're really going to end up doing like 60. The managers here are going to take credit for a lot of your work. We have a flexible work program, but you shouldn't use it because other people are going to think that you're lazy. Our offices are okay. You'll probably sit in a cubicle most of the time. You commute to work. You commute back from work. You want to work here? Hey, who's going to say yes? Nobody's going to say yes to that. So instead, we tell these wonderful stories about what it's like to work at our companies, and we've done a pretty good job. Hey, we do pretty good jobs telling stories about what it's like to work at our organizations. So that's been the first technique that a lot of companies use, and I'm sure most of you use this internally. Right? You probably have conversations about how do we tell a good story about our company. The best way you tell a good story is you create a good company. Now, the second thing that companies do, besides telling a good story, is they invest in something known as employee engagement. Now, quick show of hands, how many of you in this room have some kind of an employee engagement program at your company? Okay, put them up, don't be shy. Okay, lots of people here have some kind of an employee engagement program at your company. And this is true regardless of where we go in the world. How many of you don't have any kind of an employee engagement program? Okay, a couple, okay, but I'd say most of you do. And the way that employee engagement programs work inside of most companies is kind of like an adrenaline shot. So let me tell you what I mean. Now, on day one, when somebody starts working at your company on the first day, nobody ever shows up on the first day saying, "This place sucks." Doesn't happen. On day one, people are genuinely excited to be there. Right? They're wanting to know where they're going to be sitting, what sort of an impact are they going to make, what team am I going to be a part of, what tools am I going to be using, right? On day one, the first day of your job, everyone is excited about being a part of that organization. It's always the case. But something happens over time where after day one, our satisfaction goes down, down, down. And then right around here, the company says, we should do an annual engagement survey. And so the company does the annual engagement survey, and they score a 65. And they panic. And then they turn to HR, they turn to all of you, and they say, hey, 65 isn't good. We want 95. Give us a 95 engagement score. And so a lot of people come together and they try to figure out, well, how do we get employees to be happy inside of our company? What can we do quickly that doesn't cost a ton of money to make that number go up? And as they're sitting around the table, somebody comes up with a brilliant idea and they say, why don't we give them free food every Friday? So now every Friday your employees get free food. And they're a little happier. Right? They're a little bit happier. And then again, engagement goes back down. And we do another annual engagement survey. And we get a bad score. And again we say, how do we get this number to go up again? What else can we do? And somebody says, why don't we give employees hot yoga on Tuesdays? And it goes back up. And we say, yes, we got a good score. And guess what happens again? It goes back down. And then you do something else. It goes back up and down and up and down. And so really what happens is we treat employee engagement like an adrenaline shot. In other words, you're not making any change to your company. Right? What it's like to work there is still the same. All you're doing is you're distracting employees from the reality of what it's like to work there by giving them perks and shiny things and just throwing things at them, trying to make them happy. It doesn't make any sense. So this is why most companies around the world treat employee engagement like an adrenaline shot. Right? You get a boost, spikes, goes back down, another boost. Right? That's what happens. Now the interesting thing is that most companies, when you ask them, why do you do any kind of an employee engagement program? Why do you do it? They say, well, we want to empower our people. We want to empower our people. We want to make them feel good. But guess what? On day one, right here, employees are already empowered. Right? Nobody shows up to work on the first day thinking, oh, I have no power. Right? On day one, they're excited. They're ready to go. What happens is inside of your companies, they get disempowered through rules and policy and bureaucracy, all these different things that we have inside of our companies. And so we disempower them. And then we say, let's empower them again. Right? I mean, it's kind of psychotic if you think about it. Right? Up and down and up and down and left and right and perks and benefits and how do we keep employees happy? It's nuts. And this is why in most organizations, employee engagement programs don't do anything. In fact, never before have we spent more time, more money, more resources, more energy on investing in employee engagement programs. And never before have we seen that the scores around the world are either lower or they're the same as they were last year and the year before that and the year before that. So how does that make any sense? How is it that we put more money, more time, more energy into something and the scores don't move? It's because of that. It's because we're putting money towards the wrong things. Now, the reason why this doesn't work is because in psychology, there's a concept known as the hedonic treadmill. Some of you may be familiar with this concept. And the hedonic treadmill is a theory in psychology that basically says humans are good at adapting. Right? We're good at adapting to stuff, which means that if you give employees some kind of a perk, right? So you give them some sort of a perk here, it's cool for a little bit, right? You give me free food every Friday, and that's pretty cool for a little while. And then, after a couple months, I start to expect it. I start to say, yeah, I expect free food, of course. Of course I should get free food on Fridays. What else are you going to do for me? And then the company has to think of, okay, well, they're used to free food already, so we got to give them something else, and then something else, and something else. In other words, whenever you give employees another perk, another benefit, it's cool for a little bit. And then it wears off, and it goes back to normal, right? Back to that kind of flat line. We're used to it. We've become accustomed to it. We expect it. We know it'll be there. It's wore off. And this is a very dangerous way to build a company. Because what it does is it teaches your people that they should be with your organization because of things that they get. Not because of value that they contribute, not because of value that you give them, simply because of things that they get. Now pretend for a minute that you are in a relationship with somebody simply because they give you nice things. What happens one day when the person who you're in a relationship with can't afford to give you that nice thing anymore? You're going to leave, and you're going to go somewhere else, and you're going to find somebody else who can give you those nice things. So if you build a company that's purely focused on giving employees stuff, then don't be upset when your employees leave when you can't give them the stuff. So don't build a company that's based on this. So employee engagement has basically become this idea of how do we give employees perks and benefits and cool things to distract them from the reality of what it's like to work at our company. And this begs the question of then, what is employee experience? Employee experience, on the other hand, is this idea of changing the core workplace practices inside of your company around your people. Changing the core workplace practices of your company around your people. That's very different than giving them free stuff. Now, there was a psychologist by the name of Thomas Gilovich, and he did some research, some fascinating research, and he looked at how does satisfaction level get impacted depending on if you buy a physical good or if you invest in an experience. So in other words, if you bought, let's say, an iPhone, or you bought something, a car, anything, what happens to your satisfaction level over time? Over time, your satisfaction level goes down if you buy a physical good. But if you invest in an experience, over time, your satisfaction goes up. So if you had a choice, for example, to buy an iPhone or to eat at Central, over time, you will be more satisfied eating at Central than you will be with your iPhone. Right? Over time, your satisfaction with an experience goes up. Satisfaction with a physical good goes down. And this is what the world's leading organizations have figured out. They have figured out, how do we make it feel like when somebody starts working inside of our company, it feels like they just bought an experience. It doesn't feel like a transaction. It doesn't feel like they just bought something. It feels like they just invested in an experience. That's what I want to encourage you to think about. Right? That's what human resources is becoming. You're not in human resources anymore, you're in human transformation. Right? You're in human transformation, and human transformation is very much based on this idea of employee experience. Now, to try to understand what this means, I looked at a lot of different companies. I looked at 252 companies around the world. I looked at all the Fortune 100, all the Fortune 100 best places to work, Glassdoor's top organizations to work for. And I looked at all of these organizations to figure out who does a great job of investing in employee experience and who does not. And from all of the 252 organizations that I looked at, this is what I found. Only 6% of all of the organizations that I looked at do an amazing job of investing in employee experience. 6% out of 252 companies, right? That's nothing. And these are companies like Facebook and LinkedIn and Cisco and Microsoft, Accenture, a couple other organizations like that. Those companies do a great job of investing in employee experience. 20% of companies I looked at and I thought, how are they still in business? These are terrible companies to work for. In fact, if you look at this list, you'll see that half of all the organizations are either doing nothing or they only invest in one thing. Only culture, only technology, or only physical space. The good news is that 23% of companies are very good. They're not amazing, but they're almost amazing. They're almost amazing. So that gave me some hope. And a lot of people always ask, what's the ROI of doing this? Why should we invest in the experience of our people? Is it a nice thing to do? Is it a fun thing to do? Does anybody care? And so I tried to understand, what is the ROI of investing in employee experience? And I looked at the ROI in a couple different areas. The first thing that I looked at was anecdotal data. In other words, I interviewed a lot of executives at organizations around the world, and I asked them, do you see an impact in employee experience? And they say, yeah, our employees, I think they're happier, we think they're more productive. You know, they didn't have data, but they started to share that they were observing things. And I thought, okay, that's a good start. Let's see what else we can do. So I took these experiential companies, the top 6% that scored in the amazing category. And I took those companies and I wanted to see how often do those companies appear in other best of lists. So most innovative companies, most valuable brands, top companies for HR, all these different lists that exist. How often do these experiential companies appear in those other lists? Customer Satisfaction Hall of Fame is another list that I looked at. And across the board, I saw that experiential companies appear in these other lists 2 times as often, 5 times as often, 40 times as often. So clearly there's something going on here. Then the next thing that I looked at was dollars and cents. I looked at what is the ROI that these organizations are seeing. And I found that experiential organizations, on average, they're smaller, they're more profitable, they have higher revenue per employee, higher profit per employee, 40% lower turnover. So clearly there's something going on here. Clearly there's some tangible ROI from investing in employee experience. And then the last thing that I looked at was stock price performance. I looked at over 4 or 5 years, how do the experiential organizations perform when compared against other organizations? And here too, across the board, we saw experiential organizations crush everybody else. They just dominated everybody. So clearly there is something going on here. Clearly there is a tangible ROI of when you invest in employee experience. Now when I was writing my book, I thought that this idea of employee engagement and employee experience were totally different and totally separate, not related. But that's actually not true. Instead, what I found is that it's how we think about this stuff that's been a little bit wrong. So we typically focus on this, right? The engagement side. And we hope that if we focus on engagement, we get the ROI. But the problem is, engagement isn't the cause of something. Right? Engagement isn't the cause of something, engagement is the outcome. So you do something to get employee engagement. And because of employee engagement, you get ROI. So what is the something that you do? You invest in the experience of your people. You invest in the experience of your people, and then they become engaged at work. And then when they become engaged at work, you see ROI. But you can't just focus on the middle piece, right? You can't just focus on employee engagement because this is not the cause of something, this is the outcome. So for a long time, we've been very obsessed with trying to understand the outcome without trying to understand the cause. Employee experience is the cause, employee engagement is the outcome. And then you get the ROI. Now, one of the things that a lot of people always ask is, how does the employee experience impact anything on the customer side? Right? I mean, if you notice, the employees aren't the ones who are directly making the money for your company. Right? I mean, the money comes from customers who buy stuff. Right? The customers that you have. So how does investing in your employees get your customers to buy more stuff? And when I interviewed a lot of executives, they told me that it happens because it unlocks the discretionary effort of employees. So think about it for a minute. If you go to a bank, if you go to a supermarket, if you go fly on an airplane, it's always the same. Right? It doesn't matter what bank you go to, it doesn't matter what supermarket you go to, it doesn't matter what airline you fly on. The experience is usually the same. You buy stuff the same way, you check out the same way, the stores look the same, the airplanes look the same. So if it's the same, then how come some companies are consistently outperforming others? If it's the same, then how come some organizations have better customer experiences than everybody else? If it's the same, then how come some companies are consistently out-innovating everybody else in their space? It's because when you invest in the experience of your people will go above and beyond to create great experiences for your customers. So if you want to have a better customer experience, it starts by investing in the employee experience. And this is why we see the ROI that you saw in those charts. These companies are making more money because the employees are going above and beyond to create great customer experiences. The customers are buying more, spending more, telling people about the brand. It's bringing in more money to the organization, which in turn sees ROI. So, what is employee experience? The good news is that for every single company, for every employee at every organization around the world, there are only 3 things that you need to do to create an amazing employee experience for your people. There are 3 environments that you can control to create great experiences. You can control the culture, you can control the technology and the tools that employees use in your company, and you can control the space in which employees work. Those are the 3 things that you can play with. And if you do an amazing job at all 3, your organization will see great employee experiences. So corporate culture is how you feel. The technology aspect is the tools and resources employees have access to do their jobs. And physical space is exactly that. It's the spaces in which employees work. Now think about a minute, a moment in your career where you didn't like your job. Right? Think about a time in your life where you worked for a company and you hated it. And you quit your job and you went to go work for another company. And the other company that you went to work for, it's around the same size. You're in the same city. You're doing the same kind of work. And now, all of a sudden, at this new company, you love your job. Why do you now love your job? What changed? It's not the industry. It's not the geographic location. You're doing the same type of work. You're living in the same city, making around the same amount of money. But now, all of a sudden, you love your job. Why? It's because of these three things. It's because the new company that you went to go work for, all of a sudden, you feel better about the work that you're doing. You have more tools and resources to do the job that you're doing. And the spaces in which you work are more conducive for the work that you're doing. Those are the three things that you can control to shape and create great employee experiences. So, let's start off with physical space. Physical space is 30% of an employee's overall experience. So 30% of an employee's experience comes from the physical space, the environments in which they see. Physical space refers to the food that they might have, the color of the walls, the art that hangs on the walls, the people who are there, everything that you can see and touch and taste and breathe in. All of these things are a part of the physical space. And for a long time, we always assumed that physical space is just, it's a roof, it's walls, that's all you need. But what a lot of recent research shows us is that the physical space actually helps connect an employee's sense of belonging and purpose and mission to the organization. The physical space acts as an artifact that represents what your company stands for. So think for a minute about your favorite superhero. Wonder Woman, Batman, Spider-Man, whoever it might be. But if you think about your favorite superhero, you identify the superhero by their logo, right? The symbol that they wear that identifies who they are. For your employees, that symbol is the space in which employees work. That is the symbol that represents your company. It's not your values, it's the space in which employees work. So ask yourselves, what does your space represent about your company? One of the things that employees care about most when it comes to physical space is making sure that their values physically get manifested in the spaces in which employees work. So here's the problem, right? Every company in the world has a set of values, right? And if you talk to your neighbors here and you ask them, what are your company values? I'm willing to bet that one or two values that your friend has are also the same values that are at your company. Values are not unique. Values are not special. The values at your company are not special. Do you know how many companies around the world have values like fun and trust and transparency and collaboration and innovation? These are common things, right? In fact, most of you in here probably have innovation as one of your core values or something like it. The values are meaningless unless the values come to life. How do the values come to life? Employees have to see those values come to life in the spaces in which they work. A couple of years ago, a large company, 350,000 people, they brought me into their space, into their headquarters, and they said, we're investing a lot of money into employee experience, and we're really thinking about the future of work, and we want to show you what we have. And I said, great, I would love to come by. So they bring me into their offices, and by the way, this is a company that had values like trust and collaboration and fun and transparency, all these wonderful things. I show up to their offices and they bring me in. It's 3 people, all wearing a suit and a tie. And these are non-customer facing roles, by the way. They bring me into their offices and I see hundreds of people sitting in gray cubicles, huge cubicles, like 8-foot tall cubicles. The walls are painted brown, and you hear nothing. It's quiet. Every now and then somebody will like poke their head out from their cubicle, look around, go back in. And I was shocked, because this is a company that's telling me that they care about fun and trust and collaboration and innovation, but you don't see any of that in the space. So your values are meaningless unless those values come to life. You should be able to write your values down on a piece of paper and walk around your company and see those values. Do you see trust? Do you see collaboration? Do you see fun? Do you see innovation? If you don't see those things, you have a problem. So physical space, again, 30% of the overall employee experience, and it acts as a symbol that represents what your company stands for. So ask, what does your company stand for, and how does that physical space represent that? The second environment, technology. Technology is also 30% of an employee's overall experience. 30% comes from technology, 30% comes from physical space. Technology refers to the tools, the devices, the hardware, the apps, all these different things that employees use to get their jobs done inside of your organization. And for a long time, we always thought that technology was just a technology thing. Right? It belongs to IT. Right? We don't care about it, it's an IT thing. But now we realize that when technology inside of a company breaks down, the human aspect inside of that organization also breaks down. So when employees don't have the tools and resources to do their jobs, the other thing that breaks down is trust breaks down, collaboration breaks down, communication breaks down. All of these things start to break down inside of your company. This is why there's never been a greater opportunity for HR to work with IT. I think these are the two most exciting jobs inside of organizations. These are the two functions inside of organizations that are pushing a lot of these themes around employee experience. And it's also the two parts inside of organizations that don't talk to each other. They don't. In most companies that I talk to, HR doesn't talk to IT, which is fascinating because these are teams that are supposed to be working together to drive this employee experience. Last year I went to go speak in Europe at a large bank. And after I gave my talk to their executives, I had the opportunity to interview their employees one-on-one. And I would interview their employees and I would ask them, do you like working at this bank? And they would all tell me the same thing. We love the corporate culture, it's great. We love the physical space, it's beautiful. We all want a new job. And I thought, why would you want a new job? The space is beautiful, the culture is great. Why wouldn't you want to be a part of this kind of an organization? It turns out because it was a technology problem. A lot of the themes and topics that we talk about when we say the future of work are powered by technology. Flexible work, real-time communication and collaboration, right? All these things are not possible without technology. So if you don't have the right technologies in place at your company, all of this stuff cannot happen. And at this particular bank that I was at, they had no flexible work programs. Employees were constantly duplicating each other's work. They didn't know what was going on. They couldn't communicate and collaborate in real time. And even though they loved the people, and even though they loved the space, they actually couldn't do their jobs. And they started to resent the company, and they started to not want to be a part of the company. And that is why they were all looking for jobs elsewhere. So technology is 30% of the overall experience. And again, it is absolutely a human thing. Because when technology breaks down, it's a human problem. Now, of course, I can't talk about technology without in some way addressing and mentioning artificial intelligence. Because we see a lot of conversation around that. We see a lot of debate around that. And a lot of people are wondering the impact that technology and artificial intelligence will have on jobs and on humans all over the world. So quick show of hands, how many of you in this room are optimistic about the future of technology and artificial intelligence? How many of you are optimistic, you're positive, you think everything will be okay, everything will be fine, it'll be great? Put your hands up high. Okay. Now, how many of you think that everybody that raised their hand is nuts? And that we should be worried, and that, bad things might happen, and it's going to be a little bit scary, and, we're a little bit more skeptical? Nobody is skeptical? You guys are all positive? Couple people? Okay, I see a couple little hands poking up. You guys are like scared to... It's okay. So a lot of you are optimistic, a couple people are skeptical, and the rest of you are probably just not wanting to share your hands because you're actually skeptical. Which is fine, right? Because this is something that we see a lot. Should you be optimistic? Should you be skeptical? And we see a lot of research reports all the time, and I'm sure you have seen many of these reports as well. 47% of jobs will be automated by 2030. 2 billion jobs will be lost by 2030. That's the highest number I've seen, 2 billion jobs. Right? 10 million jobs are going to be gone. 20% of jobs, 47% of jobs, everything's going to be crazy. And you read these reports, and you think it's a scene from like a zombie movie. Right, where we're all going to be walking around with pitchforks and shotguns and nobody's going to have a job and it's just going to be chaos everywhere. That's what it makes it sound like. But interestingly enough, when you talk to these executives, and I've interviewed many of them, they tell me the exact opposite is happening. So for example, I interviewed the Chief Leadership and Human Resources Officer at Accenture. They have hundreds of thousands of employees around the world, and Accenture automated 17,000 jobs. 17,000 jobs they automated, but they didn't lose a single person. So they automated jobs that were in finance. And the 17,000 jobs they automated were from people that were who we would call number crunchers. Right? They would stare at Excel spreadsheets, they would come up with calculations, create formulas. That was their job. And they said, we don't need you to do that anymore. We have technology that can do that. But instead of firing those people, they upskilled those 17,000 people, and they told them, now we want you to be strategic advisors to our clients and help them understand what these numbers mean. What does the data mean? So they changed the way that they think about these people. McDonald's, another good example. We see all sorts of stories about how McDonald's is putting kiosks and screens in a lot of their restaurants. And then we get worried because we say, well, if they're going to have screens in all their restaurants and kiosks, what's going to happen to the millions of people who work at McDonald's? What's going to happen to all of them, because we know we don't need them. We don't need cashiers anymore. We don't need people to take your order. What's going to happen to all of those jobs? And I interviewed the Chief People Officer of McDonald's, David Fairhurst. And I asked him this question, and I said, are you losing people? And he said, no. The number stays the same, and in some cases, we're actually increasing the number of people. And I said, how are you doing that? And he said, because we want McDonald's to be more of an experience business, a service business, where you don't just come in and order your food, but we're going to bring you your food. We're going to ask you how you're doing. We're going to create that experience for you instead of just creating a restaurant where you just need to pick up your food and leave. And lots of organizations are doing this as well. So technology, I think most of what we're seeing is not human against technology, it's human with technology against problem. Human with technology against a challenge, against something that we're trying to overcome. And this is what we see a lot of. I mean, look at Amazon, for example. They obviously automated more jobs than almost any other company that's out there. But they've also created almost more jobs than any other company that's out there. Because they're constantly exploring new business models, new areas to create. Right? They're constantly exploring new things. So I think that there are only two ways that we will get to that scenario where jobs will be automated and we're going to be in trouble. And the two ways that we'll be in trouble, The first one is if business leaders at companies around the world get together and they say, we don't like humans anymore. Humans are terrible. We don't like people. We want to fire everybody and just bring in bots and technology. And it's true, there might be some companies out there that do that. There might be some companies out there who say, you know what? We only care about money. We only care about cutting costs. And we really don't like any of the people who work here anyway, so let's just get rid of them and bring in technology. There might be some companies like that. We haven't seen much of that yet, but they might be out there. So that's the first thing, the first trouble scenario. But as I mentioned, we're not really seeing that happen. The second thing that I think can put us all in trouble for losing jobs to technology depends on all of us on an individual level. Because one of the most important skills that we all need to possess as individuals, and one of the most important skills that your employees need to possess, is the ability to learn how to learn. To be a perpetual learner. Constantly learning new things, constantly trying new things. Being a perpetual learner means that you can't just rely on companies or on schools to teach you everything you need to know to be successful. They can help, they can provide resources and tools, but you as an individual need to be more accountable over your personal and professional development. That's just the world that we live in. The CEO of AT&T recently went in front of his entire company. And he said, if you're not willing to be a perpetual learner inside of AT&T, you should quit. He said, we'll give you tools, we'll give you resources, and we'll support you in every way that we can. But sometimes you're going to need to use your own time. Sometimes you might even need to use your own resources to learn what you need to know to be successful at AT&T. But if you are not willing to make that commitment of accountability to us as an organization, then you should quit. And there are very few companies that have made that kind of a statement in front of everybody. So the other way that I think that you can lose your job is if you fail to be a perpetual learner. If you just stand there and wait for your company to teach you everything, if you just stand there and assume that your school will teach you everything, you're in trouble. But the good news is you've never had access to more tools and resources online and all over the place to help you make sure that you can succeed in whatever the future might bring. But you also have to be more accountable. Take that responsibility. Don't rely on other people or on institutions to teach you what you need to know to be successful. So if you can be that perpetual learner, if you can learn how to learn, you're in very good shape. So technology, again, 30% of the overall experience. Physical space, 30% of the overall experience. That leaves us with corporate culture. Corporate culture is 40% of the overall experience. And unlike the other two, corporate culture is oftentimes not the one that you can see or touch or taste or breathe in. Corporate culture is the one that you feel. And this is why this is the hardest one for most organizations to figure out. I was never a good student. When I went to high school, I had terrible grades. I went to community college, I had terrible grades. And then I went to the University of California in Santa Cruz. And I double majored in economics and psychology. I graduated with honors, and I was very excited to join the corporate world, to join the business world. I was excited to make an impact. I was excited to have that first job. In my first job out of college, I went to go interview for a technology company. And when I interviewed there, they told me, you're going to be doing amazing things, you're going to love the work that you're doing, you're going to have great leaders, we're going to have a beautiful space. Right? They told me the story. And I fell for the story, and I took the job. And I was so convinced that this would be a great company to work for that I even was willing to forget about my long commute. I had to drive an hour and a half to work and an hour and a half home from work every day. 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week I was driving just for my job. But they told me such a good story that I thought, I'll take the job. A couple months into my job, instead of doing all the things that they promised me I would do, I was doing data entry, I was doing cold calling, and I was doing PowerPoint presentations. And I'll never forget, one day the CEO comes out of his beautiful corner office, and he comes over to me and he says, "Jacob, I got a really important project for you." And I got very excited. And I said, "Yes, what's the important project?" And he puts his hand in his pocket and he takes out his wallet. And from his wallet, he takes out a crisp $10 bill, slaps it in my hand, and says, "I'm late for a meeting. I need you to go to Starbucks and get me a cup of coffee, and get yourself a coffee too." "Thank you, you're so generous." And my immediate reaction to this was, are you out of your mind? Are you nuts? This is why I worked so hard in school, is to get you a cup of coffee? You idiot, get your own stupid cup of coffee. That's what I said on the inside. On the outside, I said, of course, I would love to get you that cup of coffee. That's why I took this job, is to get you coffee. I hope it burns your face off. And so that was one of the last full-time jobs I've ever had working for anybody else. And ever since then, I've been passionate about this idea of the future of work and employee experience and leadership and all these things that we're starting to see now. Now contrast this to a story that's oftentimes told about President Kennedy. When President Kennedy went to go visit the NASA Space Center, and he's doing a tour of the NASA Space Center. And in the middle of a tour, he sees a man walking down the hall with a broom and a bucket. And he stops the tour, and he goes over to the man, and he says, "Hi, I'm President Kennedy. What do you do here?" And the man says, "I helped put a man on the moon." He didn't say, "I sweep the bathroom floors." He didn't say, "I restock paper towels." He said, "I helped put a man on the moon." And that's a very different type of corporate culture. And corporate culture is something that we learn. And we learn through the behaviors and the actions of the leaders inside of our organizations. So corporate culture is 40% of the employee's overall experience. 40%. So where do we begin? How can we start creating great experiences inside of our organizations? There are a couple of things that you can start doing. The first thing that I want to encourage you to think about is to remember the employee experience equation. And everything that you do inside of your company, think about it in terms of how does it impact culture, how does it impact technology, how does it impact the space in which employees work. Culture, technology, physical space. These are the three things you can control. That's first. The second thing that you can do is to think of your organization in terms of moments that matter to your people. Now in HR, we're very obsessed with this idea of the employee life cycle. Right? Attract, hire, nurture, retain, blah, 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 right? We all know that employee life cycle. But let's say tomorrow you go to your company and you find an employee that's walking around. If you go up to that employee and you say, "Hey, what stage are you in?" How many of you think that employee is going to know? Is anybody ever going to respond and say, "Oh yeah, I'm in the nurture stage. I'm in the attract stage. I'm in the transition stage"? No. The employee life cycle is what we created because that's how we think about our time, or that's how we think about employees' time with us. But if you were to ask your employees, how do they think about their time with you, they're going to answer very differently. They're going to answer in terms of moments. So you'll say, "What stage are you and how's it going?" And they'll say, "Well, I've been here for a couple of weeks. I'm a little nervous. I'm still trying to learn some stuff." Or they might say, "It's good. I've been doing great. I got my first promotion. We bought our first house. We're having our first child." Right? They answer in terms of moments that matter to them. So the second thing I want you to think about is, what are the moments that matter in the lives of your people? Right? what are the moments that matter inside of your organization to your people? And I'll tell you, there's no greater moment that matters that's wasted inside of organizations than an employee's first day on the job. Think about the first day on the job for most people. You show up to work, you can't find a parking spot, so you park somewhere far away, you run into work, you're sweating, you're a couple minutes late, you're exhausted. You show up to your desk, there's nobody there, you can't get in because they forgot to put your name on the security check. And then you get to your desk and there's a computer that's folded with a little post-it note that says welcome. You open the computer, you can't log in, nothing's working. It's lunchtime, you eat by yourself, nobody says hi to you. Right? You end up not getting much done during the day. And then you go home. And your wife or your husband or your significant other says, "Hey honey, how was your first day on the job? Did you have fun?" And you say, "Oh man, maybe I made a mistake taking this job. Maybe this company's not right for me. Right? Nobody came over to me, nobody knows who I am. The company clearly didn't care to make an effort to help make me feel welcome. I couldn't get the technology to work. I couldn't do anything. I felt like I didn't belong there." And that's on day one. Right? Day one is a huge moment that matters inside of your organization. What are the other moments that matter? The best way to figure out the moments that matter is you ask your people. You ask them, what are the moments that matter most to you inside of our organization? And develop and create experiences around those moments. So that's the next thing that you can do. Another thing that you can do is around leadership. And it's this idea of being a coach and a mentor. Now, a lot of organizations, and I'm sure most of you here, have some kind of a coach and mentoring program. But unfortunately, the way that those programs work is a little bit backwards. Because typically what happens in a company that has a coaching and mentoring program is that they take somebody that's more successful, an executive, a manager, a director, and they pair them up with somebody else that is less successful. Maybe somebody that just started working there, somebody that's new. And they want the successful person to help the new or less successful person become more successful. And it's a good idea, and it works for a little bit. But soon, when the less successful or new person becomes almost as successful as the mentor gets a little angry. And the mentor gets frustrated, and the mentor says, "Uh-oh, you are becoming almost as successful as me. I'm going to keep you here forever now. I'm going to make sure that you never become more successful than me. And if you do, I will hate you forever. I will resent you." And so coaching and mentoring inside of our organizations works for a little bit up until the point where that person becomes almost successful as this person. And then we try to keep them there for all eternity. That's a terrible coaching and mentoring program. Coaching and mentoring means that you believe as a leader, as a manager inside of your company, you believe that your job is to show up every day to work to help make other people more successful than you. That's what a coach does. That's what a mentor does. You need to show up every day with this belief, with this attitude, that the reason why you are at that company is to help make other people more successful than you. That is a very different way for us to think about coaching and mentoring and leadership. Now, how many of you have kids? Okay, a lot of you. Now, when your child learns how to do something new for the first time, or when your child does something better than you, do you ever get upset and say, "How dare you do that? I am your creator. I couldn't do it and you're doing it"? Push them over. You don't do that, right? Instead, what do you say? When your child does something that you couldn't do, you say, "Wow, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't do that and you're doing it. That's amazing." Right? That's great. That's the attitude that we need to have inside of our organizations. Where when somebody does something that you couldn't do, you look at them with a sense of pride and accomplishment, not with resentment that they have become more successful than you. So that's the next step, right? Making sure that you as a manager, that your other managers and leaders inside the company believe that their job is to show up every day to help make other people more successful than themselves. The last thing that I'll leave you with is this idea of thinking of your organization much more like a lab and less like a factory. We're very good at building factories. I mean, factories are resilient, right? Hierarchies are resilient. Hierarchies are great because we've made it so that hierarchies are impossible to destroy. It's the most resilient structure that we've built. But factories are linear, they're process-centric, they're all about the status quo, they're hierarchical. Laboratories, on the other hand, embrace failure and change. They use data, the encouragement, the mentoring, testing and experimenting and innovating. That is a very different way to think about your organization. So what I want to encourage you to think about is that all of you work in laboratories. You are all scientists inside of your company. And your job is to figure out and test and experiment and play around with things to see what resonates with your employees and what drives results and performance and what doesn't. You work at a laboratory, not at a factory. And I want you to think for a minute. What would the world be like if every company in the world invested in employee experience? Think about the problems that we would be able to overcome, the challenges that we would be able to solve if everybody and every organization invested in employee experience. What would happen to our engagement levels, our happiness levels, our productivity levels around the world? Now, what do you think would happen if your company invested in employee experience? What would happen inside of your organization? And ask yourselves, wouldn't you want to be a part of that kind of an organization that invested in employee experience? Thank you very much.
Profesora asociada de la Pacífico Business School, consultora en temas de gestión de personas, comportamiento y desarrollo organizacional para empresas nacionales e internacionales, PhD en dirección de empresas de la Escuela de Negocios SADE de la Universidad de España, maestría en comportamiento organizacional de la Facultad de Negocios. Ustedes han podido poner sus preguntas en los papeles, en las fichas de preguntas, y vamos a dar inicio ahora a la discusión y el arte ya tenemos el
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Jacob. It was fascinating, and I think that everyone here in the audience thinks also the same. It was fascinating to hear about your project, your resource, your investigation, and the experience of other companies. Lo que creo que sería interesante es desarrollar algunas preguntas y aprovechar el conocimiento y la experiencia de Jacob ha mostrado acá, y de repente entender mejor alguna inquietud que ustedes tienen o algunas preguntas. Y he recibido ahorita dos, y la verdad le agradezco lo que se han mandado porque me parece que podemos desarrollar interesante discusión. So Jacob, I have for you the first question.
En español.
Just in Spanish, and you have to answer in Spanish if you can.
Sí.
Entonces nosotros los dos tenemos un acento así fuerte, entonces me imagino que todos
Muy
van a
bien, muy
entender.
bien.
Great. Jacob, the first question is in English and I will translate to Spanish.
Okay.
Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, so let's begin. So, what does the futurist? What is the role for the future, as you are futurist inside. So just let me translate. ¿Qué hacen los futuristas, como Jacob, por ejemplo, que es un gran futurista?
So, I received my certification in foresight from the University of Houston. So this is something that you can actually study and do. And a lot of people think that a futurist is somebody that predicts the future. Right? A futurist is somebody that knows what's going to happen in the future. But that's actually not true. Right? Futurists don't predict anything. Instead, futurists help make sure that you're not surprised by what the future might bring. And so the way that you're not surprised by what the future might bring is that you come up with different scenarios and situations that might happen. And so when a lot of people say, what is the future of work? Right? It makes it sound like there's only one future. There's only one thing that can happen. What's the one thing that's going to happen? But that's not true, because there are a lot of things that might happen. So my job is to try to understand what are all those different things that might happen, so that if one of them does happen, we're not going to be surprised by it. So that's what I think the role of a futurist is to help make sure that we're not surprised by what the future might bring.
So you declare yourself a clear futurist?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I have here, tengo acá dos preguntas más, y si alguien quiere, por favor, bienvenidos. There's very interesting question about, can you tell us something about the future of the physical workplace?
Oh, sure.
Que si él puede comentarnos algunas más sobre la experiencia del environment o el entorno físico en las organizaciones. ¿Qué quiere decir esto?
So since this is my first time in Peru, I'm actually really curious. So in Peru, or in this part of the world in general, when it comes to physical space, are lots of your companies thinking about like open space? Is that a lot? Okay, yeah. So a lot of these conversations are similar all over the world, right? Should we have open space? Should we have closed space? Everyone's going to be co-working, working from a Starbucks. What is it going to be? And I think really what the future of space is about flexibility. It's about freedom. It's about giving employees as much choice as you can give them. So what we're starting to see in companies around the world is that you don't just have an open space or you don't just have a closed space. You have many different spaces. And you let employees pick and choose during the course of their day how they want to work. And there was a study that was done by a company in the UK called Leaseman. And they studied how employees work. And they found that during a typical day, an employee can perform up to 21 different types of activities. Right? That's a lot, right? 21 different types of activities you can do during a day. So if you think about that for a minute, that all of your employees during a day and all of you do 21 different types of things. Conference calls, meetings, you need quiet focus time, you need collaboration time with others, you need some time to just relax and just kind of figure things out, you need to eat, right? All these different types of activities that you do. It makes sense that we should design spaces that cater to the different types of activities that we do. And so for me, I think a lot of the future of the physical space is building those environments that have different spaces for us to work.
And there is a very interesting question related to this. And the question is, how do you get engagement in home office workers?
Oh, home office workers, yes.
And exactly how you deal with the physical space in this variable. Como me parece muy interesante pregunta es, hablamos sobre físico, espacio, pero ¿qué pasa cuando trabajamos de casa? ¿Y qué quiere ver este variable y cómo puede impactar en general? Porque generalmente hay muchos trabajadores de casa.
So, I have a home office that I share with my wife and 2 dogs. And so I've been working from home for around 10 years. And this question comes up a lot, right? How do we create an engaged worker that works at home? Right? We can't control their environment because they work at home. Well, the good news is that if the employee works at home, they control their environment. That's no longer your problem. because it's their house, it's their space. They design it and control it however they want. So they actually have the ideal environment that they want to work in. But as far as engagement, that's different. Right? How do we make employees feel like they're a part of the team? How do we make employees feel like they're a part of the company, even though they don't show up to work? I think there are several things that companies have been doing. First is they rely heavily on technology. They rely very heavily on video conferencing. They rely very heavily on collaboration tools so that you can constantly check in and know and feel like you're being a part of the team. These organizations also give priority to employees that work from home. So for example, if you have a conference call, who talks first on a conference call? The people who work from home. Because you can't see them. They should get to talk first. I've seen a lot of companies where the employees who work from home, they create, they take their pictures and they put little bios about them and they hang them in the office. So that when you're walking down the office, you can see pictures and information about the people who don't actually work there. And other companies also do things like we have on-sites, right? So maybe once a month, once a quarter, we'll fly you out, you spend a couple days with the company, you talk to everybody, you meet everybody as well. So you make them feel like extra special. So you do need to put that extra time and energy and resources into making sure that the employees who you can't see are still heard and still feel like they're being seen.
Very interesting. So relate to this, there's another question, is how you build your employee, the experience development capacity. How you empower them to be with this experience. What are the tools, spaces that you create? Not only HR tasks, not only HR en general, but company values. La pregunta que me parece muy interesante es cómo crees o cómo generas la experiencia o el desarrollo de experiencia de la capacidad de los empleados. Quiere decir qué espacios, qué herramientas estás creando para que realmente podamos desarrollar esta experiencia o esta capacidad de experiencia dentro de nuestros empleados.
So for me, when I think about this question, I think of who owns the employee experience? Whose responsibility is it to create great experiences? Is it HR? Is it IT? Is it the CEO? Whose job is it? And in my book, The Employee Experience Advantage, I came up with this kind of a framework. And it's a framework that it's like a ripple. So you know when you throw like a rock in a pond or in the ocean, it ripples out. The middle of the ripple is the CEO and the executive team. So these people need to be champions of employee experience. If you look at, if you remember some of the companies that I mentioned, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Accenture, Cisco, Airbnb, all these organizations have CEOs who are champions of employee experience. They talk about it, they bring it up at the meetings, they make sure that it's talked about and heard all the time. So at the very center, you have the CEO and the executive team. Those are the biggest employee experience champions you need to have. One layer out from that, we have HR. HR is the kind of the strategic advisor that's driving a lot of these initiatives. And it doesn't mean that you own it, but a lot of people turn to HR when they think about employee experience. When they think about the future of work, they turn to HR. Right? They assume that you're going to be the experts, that you know what to say, that you know what we should be doing. So you guys are kind of like the task force, the strategic advisors. One layer out from HR, we have all managers. So every manager in the company, if you're in operations, facilities, IT, HR, customer service, doesn't matter. Every manager at the company needs to champion the idea of employee experience. They need to believe in it, they need to support it, they need to act like it, they need to demonstrate those behaviors. And then one layer out from that, we have everybody in the company. Right? All employees in the company need to speak up, they need to let the company know what they care about and what they value, they need to participate in the various surveys that the company does. If a company has a new program, you need to participate in it, right? Because they're testing these things out to help you. So you need to speak up, let your voice be heard. So everybody is ultimately responsible for creating that kind of an employee experience, not just HR.
And there's another question that relates to leadership. What just we're talking about right now, and I think that we can maybe develop much more. And the question is, how you consider the impact of leadership on the experience of employee. ¿Cómo consideras el impacto del liderazgo sobre la experiencia del empleador?
Well, no secret, it's huge, right? I mean, if you have leaders and managers in your company who don't believe in this, who don't think it's worth their time and their energy, managers who believe that an employee's job is simply to make more money or sell more stuff, I mean, you're not going to be able to create great experiences, right? So you need to have managers and leaders in your company who are progressive, who are forward-thinking. Otherwise, they're just going to hold your company back. So for some organizations, it means making tough decisions, right? I think if you're a manager and if you're a leader inside of a company, you have to believe in this stuff, right? It's your job to believe in this stuff because this is what's going to help your organization. And if you don't believe in it, I don't think you have a role in the future of leadership.
And this is also related to other instances and other charge in the universe in the organization, which means how can you convince the board to invest in the employee experience? How we can convince him and how can we make him speak in the same language? ¿Cómo podemos convencer al directorio sobre la importancia de la experiencia del colaborador y cómo podemos realmente hacer que ellos hablan en el mismo idioma?
So convincing people is obviously trickier because if there's one thing that humans are is they're resistant to change. And so it's very hard for us to convince other people to take our perspective. At work, in politics, health, fitness, anything. Right? We always try to convince other people to get them to see our perspective, and oftentimes they don't. So I think there are a few things that are important to think about. The first is that there's a lot of research that's out there. Right? I've done research, other people have done research, there are books, there are case studies, there are stories that are out there of the benefit of doing this. So you can highlight that, and you can show that. The second thing I think is that I interviewed on my podcast recently Beth Comstock. And she's the vice chair of GE. She's one of the top executives at the company. And I asked her a similar question, and I said, how do you deal with no? How do you deal with the fact that oftentimes you might want to drive change in your company and nobody else wants to do it? And she gave me this really great quote. And she said, no doesn't mean no, it just means not yet. And she gave this story of how she used to work at NBC, the communications and television company. And she wanted to do something at NBC. And she came up with the idea and she presented it to her manager and he said no. So she went back, she revised it, she made changes, she presented it again to her manager. He said no. She went back again, made changes, more information, made the idea better. Went back to him again. He said no. And then she went back again after she made more changes. And she addressed all of his concerns. And she presented the idea and he said yes. And she asked him, she said, how come now you said yes and the other times you said no? And his response was, because now you made it impossible for me to say no. In other words, she spent enough time thinking about the strategy and the idea and the concepts to the point where he had no excuse for why he could say no. So if you want to drive change in your company and you want to convince other people, you need to make sure that you have the stomach for it. Because you're going to try once and you'll be told no. You'll try again and you'll probably be told no again. And you might try a third time and a fourth time, and you'll probably be told no 3 and 4 times as well. But if you try the 5th time, the 6th time, eventually you will make progress with the idea. So the whole point of this is to share that if the door closes in front of you, don't just stare at the closed door. Right? You come back in and you kick the door down. And if it gets closed again, you come back again. So the way that you convince other people who don't believe in your side of employee experience, you convince them. You keep coming back, you make changes, you be persistent, you're consistent, and you're determined with it, and eventually you will start to see progress made. Especially as you can start to build up more people in the company who see that perspective. But it's a long fight, right? I mean, it's definitely an ongoing journey, but just be prepared for those no's.
Great, and it also relates to the status quo that one person asked here, and there is another question. How to start? How to begin? Where? What are the major steps that we should consider? Una pregunta es, ¿cómo empezar? ¿Cómo empezar esta experiencia, este proceso? ¿Cuáles son las primeras etapas que deberemos considerar?
Well, the best place to start are some of the things that I mentioned. Right? I think the number one thing, the easiest place to start, is to just think of those three things: culture, technology, and physical space. So if you're in HR and you want to start, think about what does culture, technology, and space mean at the company. In my book, I talk about 17 criteria. And if you actually go to my website, thefutureorganization.com, at the very top, there's something that says Employee Experience Index. If you click on it, it'll take you to a survey. And you can take the survey and see where your organization scores on the Employee Experience Index. So the first place to start is to understand, when it comes to culture, technology, and space, how is your company doing? And then you can make improvements based on that. So that's how I would start. Think about those three environments, those three buckets, and assess where your company is in those three environments. And that'll give you guidance on what you should be doing next.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So it is related now, the other question, to the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, what are the impulse, what are the factors that the culture may impact on the future of work, as you said, and about experience, and what are the primordial or basic or principal impulses of this culture? ¿Cuáles son las claves o los impulsadores de la cultura empresarial para que realmente pueda impactar en la experiencia del colaborador?
So there are a lot of things that impact culture. In my book, I talk about 10 things. I don't remember all 10 things off the top of my head, but these are things like managers who act like coaches and mentors, diversity and inclusion is important, health and wellness is important. So culture is impacted by a lot of different things. Giving employees the opportunity to learn and grow and develop, right? That also impacts corporate culture. So there are 10 things that shape corporate culture inside your company. And I mean, it's 40%, as I mentioned, of the overall employee experience. And it's a big part of the future of work, right? Because to think about the future, you need to have a corporate culture that thinks about the future. And I talk to a lot of companies who keep saying, you know, we're very focused on legacy stuff, on thinking about the past, and you know, we're not willing to change. And if that's the kind of corporate culture you have, then that's the kind of company that you're going to build, and those are the types of results that you're going to get. So I always say that companies are designed, you get what they're designed to do. In other words, if you design a company that is outdated, that's focused on legacy, that believes in the past, then that's the kind of company that you're going to get. You're going to get a company that's constantly struggling, that's constantly trying to figure out how to innovate, constantly trying to figure out how to stay ahead. If you have a corporate culture that believes in innovation and experimentation and trying new things and coaching and mentoring, then you will have a company that's constantly one step ahead of the competition. I mean, look at a company like Salesforce, for example. You can clearly see what kind of a corporate culture Salesforce has. It's demonstrated in the products, it's demonstrated in the revenue model that they have, it's demonstrated in the spaces that they build, it's demonstrated in everything. Right? So if you want to have a company that's forward-thinking, you need to have a corporate culture that's forward-thinking. So ultimately, you get, it's, you know, we have the phrase, you reap what you sow. Right? So if you design a company that's outdated, you'll get an outdated company. If you design a forward-thinking company, you'll get a forward-thinking company.
Interesting. But now there's other question about how really this purpose of experience of the employee can work, especially with employees that are working a lot of years, that are doing very routine jobs. How can, what is your perception, your knowledge about how this really can work with this kind of employees? La pregunta es si la propuesta de experiencia del empleado realmente puede funcionar con empleados que tienen bastante años en la empresa y que están haciendo la misma labor.
So if you're doing a very routine job, one that can be broken down into a series of steps, that's perfect for technology. Right? That's perfect for automation. Right? If you can write down everything that you do on a piece of paper and write it down in different steps and give it to somebody like me and I can come in and do your job, that's not good. Right? Because that means that your job is perfect for automation and perfect for technology. Which is interesting because oftentimes when I interview executives and I say, what's a typical day like for you? They always say there's no such thing as a typical day. That's what you want. You want to have an organization where when you go to your employees and you ask them, what is a typical day like for you? They say, oh man, I have no typical day. It's different all the time. Working on new things, I'm traveling here, I'm doing this, I'm working with different customers. That's what you want your employees to say. I have no typical day. So that's the first part of the question. I think if you can break down your job into a series of steps and routines, that's not good. The second thing you asked about older workers. People that have maybe been at the company for a long time, what should they be doing? I think that we don't value older workers enough. Because older workers have a lot of experience, they have a lot of knowledge, they have a lot of wisdom. And most of our organizations are very obsessed with millennials and with Gen Z and with the younger generation because they're the new ones coming into our companies. But we forget that the company was built on a lot of these older workers. Right? These are the people who built the company, they created the company, they know how it works, they know the inside, they know the outside. So we need to make better use of the older, more seasoned workers inside of our organizations. I think those are great people to have be the mentors, the coaches, the advisors. So instead of forcing those people to retire from your company because they're 65 or 70, instead you say, look, we don't want you to do your usual job anymore, but we also don't want you to retire. We want you to stay at the company and be a coach, be a mentor inside of our company, advise the other people, help us figure out what we can do to improve. And I think that's a very unique role that we can have for older workers that have been at the company for a long time.
Interesting. And this is going for the other question or related question to culture. Someone mentioned about green culture, green place culture. What do you think about this kind of culture and how can you work with experience of the
green?
worker? Yeah, green.
I'm not even familiar.
Like environmental?
Okay. Environmental.
La pregunta es, ¿cómo empresas con cultura de entorno que preocupa por el entorno, por el ambiente, que se llama culturas verdes, tienen que ver o pueden integrar el tema de la experiencia del colaborador?
So if you work for an environment company or a green company, it's great because you already have a vision and a mission and purpose that's noble and one that you can latch onto. Right? You already have that cause. So for example, if you work for a software company and you're building software or you're building products, that company needs to try if you work for a company that's saving lives. It's oftentimes you already have that big mission and the big kind of goal that you're trying to do. In that case, what the company needs to do is just do a better job of connecting, right? Building the bridge, telling that story. So if you work for a green company, you already have that kind of hard part done. You just need to focus on building the bridge, telling that story so that the employees know how the impact that they're having or how the work that they're doing is having an impact on the company and on the world.
And this is also a very interesting question about control, about managing.
Yeah.
And the question is how you, what's happened when you can't control these three aspects of culture, of technology, and physical space in your company? How can you manage it? La pregunta es, ¿Qué hace cuando no puedes controlar los tres experiencias que hemos hablado sobre el tema de cultura, sobre el tema de tecnología, sobre el tema física? ¿Qué podemos hacer?
So it's true, in some cases, organizations might say, you know, we can't control the physical space. For example, for flight attendants, or you work in a retail store, or you work in a bank as a teller, and the company says, well, what are we going to do? Redesign our bank so that the employees who work there are going to be happier? We're not going to do that. Are we supposed to build new airplanes? Right? We can't do that, which is true. So in the situations where you can't control all three environments, you double down on the ones that you can control. Meaning that if you can't control physical space, then you better make sure that the culture and the technology is even more amazing. So you put even extra effort in the environments that you can control. So that's ultimately what I would do. So if I work at a bank, if I work at as a flight attendant, I'm the CEO of the company, I'm going to make sure that I have the best damn culture that company has seen. I'm going to make sure that my employees have the best tools and resources to make sure that they can stay connected while they're doing their jobs. And in that case, that will help kind of alleviate some of the aspects of the physical space. So if you can't control one of them, you make sure that the other two are even more amazing.
And the related question to this is, for me, where you begin? What is the most important? ¿De qué empezamos? ¿De dónde empezamos? ¿De cuáles de los tres?
So where to begin?
Yeah.
Well, so it's what I mentioned earlier on those three environments.
Yeah.
Culture, technology, physical space.
Three of them, if you have to choose three of them, what do you begin? From where you begin?
Well, there are three of them.
Yeah.
So you're saying if you have to pick one?
Yeah.
I don't think you can pick one. That's the problem, right? Is a lot of companies say, oh, tell us the one thing that we can do. Tell us the top two things or three things that we can do. I wish it was that easy. In fact, everybody always says, what's the low-hanging fruit? Right, what's the fruit that's easiest to grab, that requires little effort? Guess what? If you're willing to put in a little effort, you're going to get little results. There's no such thing as low-hanging fruit when it comes to people. This is the fruit that's on the tallest tree, on the highest branch, that's like waving in the wind, and the fruit is just about to fall off. So you got to put in a lot of work and effort and time and energy to make sure you get that fruit before it falls off. So if your mentality going into this is already, what's the low-hanging fruit? What's the easiest thing that we can do? What's the one thing that we can do? You're already at a disadvantage. Because there's nothing. There's no easy thing.
And how you measure it? How you measure employee experience? ¿Cómo medimos la experiencia del empleado?
So I measure it with the 17 criteria that I created, which I mentioned is on the site. It's in the book, and it's something that I call the Employee Experience Index. So I measure there's 10 things for culture, 3 things for technology, and 4 things for physical space. So 17 things in total. And I measure it by assessing all 17 of those things. But ultimately, the impact that you see should be reflected in the ROI that you see at the company. So as I mentioned with those stocks and with the charts that I showed, you should see improved productivity. You should see lower turnover. You should see higher financial performance. Right? So those are the things that you should see as far as an outcome.
Okay. And this comes for HR, for our people that we are here, all of us. And the question is, how you deliver this experience, and what is really the role of HR, and if it should change, how? La pregunta es sobre recursos humanos, sobre nuestra gestión, y la pregunta es cómo podemos dar esta experiencia al colaborador y qué realmente debe ser nuestro rol, cómo podemos cambiar, qué estructura debemos tener HR.
So I was talking to the Chief Human Resource Officer of Unilever a little while ago. Her name is Lena Nair. So Unilever, big global company you're all familiar with. And I asked her, how do you spend your time as the Chief Human Resource Officer? And she said, 20% of my time I spend on HR. 80% of my time I spend on transformation. So that I think is a good benchmark. If you're in HR, you should spend 20% of your time in HR. 80% of your time, the majority of your time, you should be spent thinking about how you can propel your company into the new future. experimenting, testing, researching, interviewing, traveling to other companies, seeing what's going on. Right? That, I think, is what HR should be doing much more of. So how do you get out of the mentality of thinking that you're not in human resources, you're in human transformation? The only way that you can become in human transformation is if you spend your time thinking about transformation. So that's where I would start. That's what I would recommend for HR. Follow the advice from Lena Nair. 20% of your time on HR, 80% of your time spent on transformation.
You mentioned that employee experience is based on good understanding the needs. And you mentioned some tools. Can you develop more about how can understand really the needs of the employees? Ha mencionado sobre la experiencia del empleado está basado sobre las necesidades de los empleados. Entonces la pregunta es si puede extender un poquito más acerca de las herramientas, de las experiencias que realmente podemos nosotros aprender de los empleados.
I always find this question to be funny. All right. How do we understand the needs of our employees? How do you think? You ask them. So when you go home to your husband or your wife or your significant other, do you ever go to your friends and you say, you know what, I don't understand my wife or my husband. How can I understand them? What should I do? No. Instead, you go to your spouse, you go to your husband and you say, hey honey, I have a question. Do you want to do this? Do you like that? Do you prefer this or do you prefer that? Or you ask them. And so I think the same thing is true inside of our companies. There's no secret. There's no like magic formula here for what to do. Managers, have conversations with your people. If you're a manager inside of your company, I should be able to go up to you and ask you, okay, tell me about the people who work on your team, right? Tell me, what do they care about? What do they value? What are you seeing from your team? You should be able to know this, right? It's like if you come up to me and you say, tell me about your wife, tell me about your family, tell me about your friends. I can tell you because I talk to them and I ask them and we have conversations. The key thing here is you need to understand your employees not just as workers, but as individuals. If you assume that all of your employees are just workers, they're there just to work, you're missing half of the equation, right? You have to understand your employees as individuals, and you do that by asking them. You can do surveys, but don't just do a survey once a year. Have conversations, have regular discussions, regular dialogue. In fact, a lot of companies are even getting rid of annual employee engagement surveys.
And this relates to the expectation of the employee, or the growing expectation that they have about when you're doing all this program and we're doing the change. There's a lot of expectation. How you manage this expectation without falling them down? La pregunta es, con este proceso tenemos también muchas expectativas que estamos generando en nuestros empleados. ¿Cómo manejamos esas expectativas? ¿Cómo creamos un ambiente que realmente no van a ser desilusionados después?
So this is good. There should be expectation. I mean, organizations should be expected to create places where employees want to show up. Like, it's kind of weird for me to even think about that idea, right? Because almost everybody in the world has a job. And almost everybody in the world works for a company. So why shouldn't we expect these companies to be good places to work? We spend almost all of our time working. Right? We spend almost as much time at work as we do at home. So for me, it's crazy to have to talk to an executive or a CEO or a manager and a director and explain to them why they should even be doing this. How should they manage expectations? You should have very high expectations as employees on your company. And the way that as an organization you can try to manage that is you become as transparent and open as you can. So you let your employees know what you're working on, what you're struggling with, what's not working, things that you've tried, that you've failed at, that you can do better at. So as an organization that's trying to invest in employee experience, don't make it a secret. You're not designing something for your people, you're designing something with your people. So be as transparent and open as you can about this. get feedback. Ask questions, get advice, let them know, hey, you know, we want to do this, but we don't know how. Anybody have any ideas on how we can do this better? Be transparent, be as open as you can. So that's the best way that you can manage the expectations, is you're just open about it, so that they know, the employees know, what you're struggling with and what the challenges are.
Well, Jacob, I think that we learn a lot. Thank you very much for your experience, for your knowledge, for the way to present it. Estoy agradeciendo a Jacob por su conocimiento, por la experiencia, por la para mí fascinante charla que hemos escuchado. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Picture.